I can see some familiar faces. This is, thank you and welcome everybody for joining us. I can see some very familiar faces and I'm going to introduce some perhaps unfamiliar faces as well. But thank you for joining. You've just seen the Before live video, which I want to say thank you to Richard for hosting us for this. So this is a little bit of an experiment in terms of chatting to lots of different people about the sorts of things that we might normally be meeting in the Curzon in Oxford, or we might be meeting the Soho Farmhouse, or we might be meeting somewhere in London to talk about the things that we're going to talk about. But I'm delighted to welcome 3 guests today. What we're going to do is we'll have a chat with each of them in turn. I've asked them to tell us what they do, and also to think about the sorts of things that have changed for them, how they've had to pivot, the sort of trends that they're seeing happening out there. And then we'll have time for questions. We use the chat for questions. So you have a choice. You can either send a question by chat and I can ask it for you, or if you'd like to ask it in person, just let me know when you send your question to say I would like to ask this, and you're very welcome then to join us properly and to chat. So so my first guest, I might, just because it's interesting, these Zoom calls, that you get the sense that people are sometimes lurking. So I'm going to get my 3 guests to switch on their cameras in a moment and just introduce themselves and say hello. You can see who they are. And then we're going to kick off, first of all, with Neil from Fresh Air. But Lisa and Neil and Sue, pop your cameras on and we can say hello and wave. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Sue. So you have come on in completely different tiles to where I expected you. So I apologize if eye levels go completely out of the window. But that's one of the quite nice things about broadcasting in this way. So so we have to now, I'm going to get Sue and Lisa to switch their cameras off. We're going to stick with you, Neil. And I'm going to ask you just to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and also what you have been doing, because when you joined us for the pre-chat, you said that you were feeling a little bit zoomed out.
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Neil. I run a company called Fresh Air Production, and we are basically a specialist brand-funded podcast production company. So my background is as a radio producer. I was, a long time ago, a radio producer for Radio 5 Live. And as with many, I left the BBC to go freelance and formed this company, Fresh Air, actually 19 years ago now. And Fresh Air became a supplier of programmes to the BBC. So Radio 1, Radio 2, 4 and 5. And for most of our time, we've spent as a supplier to the BBC, because that was basically the only buyer in the market as an audio production company. And then podcast happened, and really podcasts have been around for quite a long time, but really went mainstream 3 or 4 years ago. And as many of you may have noticed, they've become even more mainstream in the last years. And we decided to concentrate specifically on brand funded podcasts rather than making our own from scratch. So we have a client list now that includes brands like Shell and Avon Cosmetics. We still do make some programs for the BBC, but a wide range of types of things, from, say, working for large corporates who want to reach a very wide audience, through to niche brands who want to speak to a small group of people. And in the last couple of months, it's been, as with everybody, been an interesting period. There was a sort of period where everybody threw their hands up in the air and didn't know what they were doing. And actually, I have to say, from an audio production point of view, we've been in a lucky position in a sector that has been able to pivot quite quickly. Partly because video is much more difficult to do in this environment. So audio is a medium that lends itself to remote recording, and we can record podcasts with people at home with a laptop and a phone. And also because companies that were all in one place have now spread out and need a medium that's easy to talk to people through, and podcasting has been lots of people's point of reference for a medium that they can use in this time. So our main pivot actually has been through our selling point up until March was we're this mega creative company full of broadcast professionals, and we can make a multi-layered program for you that takes months to build and will sound just as good as if we'd made it for Radio 4. And our line now is all you need is a laptop and a phone, and we can knock it out in half an hour, and you can be live in a week. So that's been our main thing, really, is not being too precious about making something that's beautiful, to creating things that are perhaps a little more functional, and then hopefully when lockdown finishes, we can go back to being a bit more multi-layered and artful about it.
And what was your first, what was the very first podcast that you made 3 or 4 years ago when you really got stuck in?
Yeah, so actually the very first podcast I made was back in 2006 when nobody knew what they were, and it was a pull-out in the Observer for BMW, hosted by Miranda Sawyer, looking at with an up-and-coming chef called Heston Blumenthal, who no one had heard of, talking about organic food. And at that time, in order to listen, you had to copy the URL from the pull-out in the Observer and type it into your computer, and then download it to your phone and listen. It all sounds antiquated, given that it was only 14 years ago. The resurgence really was about 2015, and we started working for the National Trust. That was our main thing. So I live in Swindon. Apologies for any Oxford United fans. I live in Swindon, and the headquarters of the National Trust are here in Swindon. So I did a sort of slow chatting up job on the marketing manager of the National Trust, and we persuaded them to make their first podcast series. And they're typical of a brand that works brilliantly in audio and podcast, because they have stories coming out of their ears, and we're able to go and record in locations that sound fantastic. So yeah, National Trust was our first full-on branded podcast in this period. And we've got over 30 different series in production at any one time. So it's been quite a boom in the last few years.
And if you were, so if you were advising the National Trust now, I don't know if you still make them, the podcast for them, but what would you tell them to do differently now that you did with them all those years ago? I mean, how has the environment changed? Obviously, there's a lot more competition.
Yeah, so there's a lot more comments. So do you mean in specifically in lockdown, or do you just mean in general?
No, I just mean to create something that would punch through.
Yeah, there is a lot more competition. So there's over 1 million podcasts out there, and it's about production standards. I think there's one of my fears for podcasts as a medium is that it's perceived to be quite quick and easy and cheap. And there's a lot of brands out there who contact us to just say, we've heard that podcasts are sexy. We listen to lots of podcasts. We need a podcast. And actually what we've evolved to do much more in the last few years is be more strategic about it. So it was easy at that time to make something that sounded great and be able to punch through. Now, actually, you need to think much more strategically about what you want that podcast to achieve, because I think we've been guilty over the years. We've definitely been guilty over the years of making what are essentially vanity projects for brands and business owners. Here's 10 grand, please go and make me a podcast, so that we can say that we're in this zone. And that's fine, and we can make a nice series, but at the end of it, you then have a moment of, well, that was fun, but you can't put a call to action on a podcast. You can't link through from a podcast. So how do we know whether it worked? And so we've become much more sophisticated and at helping people to lay out right from the start what they want that podcast to achieve, and much more importantly, how it's going to be measured, because we make successful podcasts for large brands that get 1,500 listeners tops. So an example of that is Allianz, who are clearly a huge multinational insurance brand. But the podcast we make for them will only ever be of any interest to insurance brokers. But if one of those insurance brokers happens to be the person who sorts out all the insurance for BT, then great, and that's paid for itself. Whereas we have other brands who want to hit all women, for instance, Avon being a good example, and therefore helping them to show, great, you got 250,000 listens to it, but did any of those people buy any product as a result? Is a much trickier conversation to have. So we've become much better and much more sophisticated at thinking how we use social, how we use podcasting and audio as a medium to pull people in, and then provoke them to take an action as a result. So I think we are certainly the market is more sophisticated and trying to help people show whether it's been effective over and above as being a nice listen.
Yes. And what are you seeing now in terms of, is there a preponderance of a type of podcast, or are people just diving in with a whole, has anything surprised you?
The vast majority of podcasts, because actually branded stuff is still quite niche. The vast majority of podcasts is still two people talking to each other, and some of those are great. Some of those, some of the best podcasts in the world are two people talking to each other. I think there has been there are surprises, but I think the surprises, interestingly, still tend to be from the States. When you ask their favorite podcast, they still pull out This American Life, which incidentally won the Pulitzer Prize last night, which is an extraordinary achievement.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the first time they've done a Pulitzer Prize for audio, and it was won by This American Life last night. But yeah, so I think there are very good comedy breakthroughs, but they tend to be still from quite established comedians. Dear Joan and Jericho, if anybody's heard that, is a work of art, as long as you're up for a bit of rudeness. And there are some really good comedy pieces. But I still don't feel like we haven't had a British version of This American Life. We haven't had the British serial or the British. It's just so many brilliant American podcasts that you could name. It's still a relatively niche listening medium. It's still only as big as sort of classic FM or Radio 5 Live as a medium itself. So I think there are lots of good people doing lots of really good work. This Is George's podcast is probably the weirdest, most surprising thing. Which I'm
writing these down.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Sorry, and it's called Have You Heard George's Podcast, which is created by George the poet, and it's weird and wonderful, and it could probably never be funded by a brand because it's too weird. So a lot of what we do, because we're brand funded, it tends to be quite a lot of panel discussions, quite a lot of sort of thought leadership pieces, and then we come across big clients, so clients like WWF, who we've started working for, who want to create something really special and interesting and use big talent. But actually, if you're serving a small audience with a panel discussion that's really relevant to them, and it serves them, the big selling point of podcasting is the attention span. People listen to a podcast for 20, 25 minutes. And that is unique, really, amongst any medium. People don't read blogs for 20 minutes or watch videos for 20 minutes. It's a medium that you can take on the tube, when we get back to using the tube again, or out on your run or out in the car, and people stick with it. And that's, for brands, that's the main selling point. You can hold people's attention in a way that you can't with any other.
And so do you think, just going back to not having such a breakout hit as American Life, do you think it's a question of finding something that's uniquely British that will be a breakout hit? Because there have been investigative series, haven't there? People have said this is the English version, but is it finding something else, do you think?
I think it's finding it is finding our voice. And we're spoiled in Britain, frankly, by having the BBC. And that means that we are very used to having obviously publicly funded content that can be a bit weird and wonderful, that doesn't have to have adverts in the middle of it. And you've sort of got a wealth of drama and news and comedy that we're used to having. Whereas in the States, obviously, that wasn't a model that was very well known. And therefore, suddenly when people put these well-funded, beautiful pieces of audio together, it sounds like nothing they've ever heard before. So the BBC is both a blessing and a curse in that sense for the market. But yeah, I think there will be. So one example that we tried to do, we were slightly early for, was a podcast Climb of Everest, for instance. And we did this 2 or 3 years ago. And we got it to with an inch of being funded, which never happened. but that idea that you could create something that had genuine jeopardy in it. You know, we were going to send a producer up Everest. Ben Fogle was climbing. We were going to sort of chart that as we went along. And I sort of slightly cynically pitched it as the podcast where the presenter might die, which, you know, may have over-egged it slightly. But, you know, this idea of something real time that you couldn't do in video, that you could tune into on your tube in to hear. The beauty of audio is its intimacy and its immediacy, and the fact that you can, you know, we could physically do that, send someone up Everest with a microphone, and you could hear every single breath and every sort of their sort of inner monologue all the time, and it's an extraordinary thing that I still hope to do. It's one of those things.
Fantastic. So if there's somebody out there who wants to fund that or wants to go and do it when we're able to go and climb mountains, they should get in touch. I was going to, I'm not going to go into the details of kit because there are so many pieces about kit, but it'll be quite interesting. Maybe afterwards I can get you for a round robin email just to give us your top microphone tip. But what I'm interested in is there are certain words that we're all learning now, and there are new words being invented, but also technical words. And the technical word I've learned about podcasts and sound recording is latency. I think I know what that is, but are there any new words that you've learned, you know, anything that you've learned this time, or does it all just come quite naturally?
During lockdown. So there are, I mean, the interesting thing for me actually during lockdown is that it's felt quite lo-fi, but the quality's been really high. Now this does sound lo-fi, but the best microphone that any of us have in our house is our phone. It's a really, really good, virtually broadcast quality microphone that you have in your hand. And if you hold it to your ear like that, it's nigh on as good as a broadcast microphone. And there are lots of platforms that you can use. There's one called Zencast, there's one called CleanFeed. We're experimenting with these, and we're working out which is best, and it's still evolving. But actually, the vast majority of our podcasts are done with somebody holding their phone to their ear, using their voice memos, and then sending us the audio. We did a recording last week with Dua Lipa, the highest selling female artist in the world right now, and we did it on her phone, and she sent us the audio. And because we don't want to faff around too much, we don't want to have to send lots of kit to somebody to do a half-an-hour recording. As long as we know that they've pressed record, because that's obviously the producer's worst nightmare is finding out they've not pressed record. The way we're doing it is we're doing a Zoom call, so we can, one of the beauties of Zoom is obviously you can record the audio. So you have that as a backup and you record onto people's phones. And that is 85% studio quality. So to be frank, no, we're not using any new whizzy technology. We're just making the best use that we can of the technology that people already have in their hand.
Excellent. And that was a surprise to you that the phone did that job, really? Or
it was I think what was a surprise was that the other stuff wasn't much of an improvement. I think if you have Zencastr and you have a USB microphone or a professional quality microphone that can plug into your laptop, then that is better than your phone, and that's what a lot of broadcast professionals going on. But if I wrote a blog about it yesterday, there has never been a better time to book a guest for your podcast, because everybody is sat at home with bugger all to do. So we've spent most of our lives booking people into a London studio who say, can you get me a cab? How long have I got to be there? And can we book it for 3 weeks' time? And we're finding, Dua Lipa is the most extreme example we've had. But, yes, I'm at the laptop and can we do 2:00 on Tuesday? And if you make that easy for them, it's an absolute win. So, we're able, on a creative front, we're able to get people that we would never have got into a studio before. Because it's easy. So again, what the technology needs to do is enable that to be easy, not make it more difficult, and therefore sort of reverse the wins that you have by people being at home. So facilitating, as a producer, we sit on the line and we help to supervise it and spot anything that goes wrong and make sure that it's still slick. But you can see, you've got eye contact through Zoom, you've got a decent quality microphone at home. And what's most important is the quality of the conversation, not the
yeah,
whether the recording is perfect studio quality. It's
exactly. Well, thank you, Neil. I mean, that's been fantastic quality of conversation. Now, but talking about having eye contact, I may need to switch my video off because I think I'm occasionally freezing for people. So, but I'm going to say thank you. Please stay around because we're going to come back to you. But I'm going to switch over to Lisa if you're there. This is a bit like, I feel this feels like Eurovision Song Contest. Lisa, calling Lisa, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, excellent. Lisa, do you mind if I switch off my video? Because I think you can still hear me. Fantastic. Yes. So you've got the stage, my dear. So please just briefly describe what it is that you do, and then we'll have a chat about what you are doing now.
Okay, well, hi everybody. I'm a radio presenter and broadcast journalist on BBC Radio Oxford. I present my own show called The New 40, and it's all about midlife musings, really, about getting older slightly disgracefully. And yeah, my background is as a print and online journalist, predominantly in the commercial property industry. I've done that for over 20 years. I was regional deputy editor for the Estates Gazette magazine. I've also freelanced for the Nationals and for consumer and B2B magazines. And I'm also the founder of Pilkington Media Consultants, which basically provides editorial expertise in terms of media training, copy editing, copywriting, that kind of thing. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Good. That's okay. So what might be described as a portfolio career in the best possible way. So tell us, because I know you and I had a chat, we had a catch up. One of my very first Zoom chats actually with you was a catch up, and I remember us playing around with the virtual backgrounds, which we had great fun with. And you were just about, I think, to go back into the studio and reconfigure your show.
Yeah, well, basically, since we've gone into lockdown, the BBC has streamlined all of its regional radio output. So they're doing 4, 5, if you include late night shows a day. So it's dramatically reducing the number of shows that go out on air every day across the regional network. So as part of that, very sadly, my show and many other shows have been put on ice until this lockdown is over. So I've had to pivot quite a lot, actually. So I'm cover presenting. So if anyone's off, I'll go into the studio and I'll present live still for them. But I'm also having to basically do pre-records now. So I'm sending over audio packages, various different audio packages a week that get played out across the station on various different shows. And it's really looking at lockdown life, getting real life stories, talking to people about what they're experiencing, whether that's kind of the heavier stuff in terms of anxiety, depression, giving practical hints and advice on how to deal with that, to dating during the coronavirus. And a woman told me that she found her Coromeo during lockdown, which was a lovely story. And, you know, doing PE with Joe Wicks and my nieces who live in the New Forest, but we were remote, but we did it together, and things like that. So it's kind of, you know, giving a human angle to Corona and the lockdown and what people are doing, how they're doing it, how they're feeling. And it's been really interesting, actually. I've absolutely loved it.
Yes. And have you found what's happened with your playlist, the music? Do you get to choose your playlist?
Well, the BBC has a core playlist of 500 songs and a non-core playlist of another 500 songs. So, and it gets rotated, I think it's 2 or 3 times a year. So we generally play what's in the core, and that gets chosen for us. There is a team, it's scientifically worked out, that works out what gets played and when. And it looks at the demographics of the audience, of the listener, and you know, plays to what they think they'd like to hear. But you can have some input. I do in my own show. I have various music segments that I choose the music for. And obviously, yeah, you have to be more considered with music choices now. Happy songs are very popular, songs about sunshine and over the rainbow and, you know, stuff like that. Maybe not songs that talk about death and dying and, you know, loss so much. So yeah, the production team and I are working quite closely on that, on what plays out and when.
Yes, that's very interesting. And your colleagues as well, are you finding, I mean, obviously you're not seeing them in the same way, so how is there some mechanism for chatting together? Do you have updates, or do you feel actually that you're very much a lone operator now in terms of how you interface with them?
Well, I am working more remotely now than I ever have, but we have daily Zoom update meetings, you know, news meetings and various different Zoom meetings throughout the day that you can join if you'd like to, you know, in-house ones about your own mental health and how you're doing. There's a lot of support there. They're really good actually at that. And yeah, I miss being creative in a room with other people, face to face. I miss that face to face contact, but I know they're there, you know, if you need them. And they're such a creative bunch that we're always coming up with ideas anyway, and messaging each other. So it's fun. It's when you're actually in the studio, it's very different because social distancing. We have tape on the floor, you know, like in supermarkets, where you can't get more than 2 meters close to each other, and there's a skeleton staff on now, so that the newsroom, the busy newsroom, used to have 100 people on it, and now there'll be about 5 or 6, and they'll be in each corner of the room and one in the middle. So it's a very different environment, very different.
Yes. And just thinking about language and jargon, because I'm sure you have all sorts of shorthands for you know what you're doing, but is there anything that's come up, I mean, apart from Coromeo, which I think is really is a fun one, if that's what you found during this, some positivity. Is there anything else that are you finding that you're having to go into other areas, or is the routine pretty much the same except that you're doing it from home? Have you got a microphone? Have you got a fancy mic, or do you do it from your phone?
I have used voice notes, and I have done it on my phone, and it has been broadcast, and it sounded completely brilliant. I mean, in terms of quality, you know, you would never know the difference. I use a Tascam usually if I'm you know, out and about remotely. But
what's a Tascam?
It's a handheld.
That's a bit of jargon. That's a bit of jargon.
Yeah,
I have no idea what that is.
It's a handheld recorder that's broadcast quality. So that's what I would usually use. But no, I've definitely used my phone, and you can't really tell the difference between that and a Tascam, which is amazing. Yeah, it's just, you know, talking to people in a different way about different things. I find people are more open now to talk about their feelings and how they're feeling about life generally. They're very much more open, and you can have some really interesting conversations with people. All you've got to say to them is, you know, how are you coping with lockdown? And you'll be amazed at the answers that you get from people. It's really interesting.
Yes, it's interesting, that connection, isn't it? Well, thank you. I'm going to move over to Sue, wherever she is, somewhere out there in the ether. But thank you so much, and we'll come back to you for a chat and questions. And I want to find out what you're listening to as well at the end. Some top tips. Thank you.
Thanks.
So Sue, where are you? Is Sue there? Or have we lost her?
No, I am there.
Oh, my dear. Hello.
Hello.
Sue, tell us who you are and what you do.
So I'm Sue Elliot-Nicholls, and I think I probably have a portfolio career as well. So I'm an actress predominantly, And thankfully, during these times, I'm also a voice actor. So I have been doing quite a lot of remote recording, and I write comedy, and I write columns, and I also make features for Radio 4. So actually that's been great because it's meant that I can carry on working. I think I'm probably busier than usual, actually, because I think people are kind of quite desperate for something quick and something funny, because I think what I write and what I talk about and what I do is comedy. So I think people are really desperate for something to have a bit of a laugh about, and also because the comedy I do is quite gentle. That's kind of what people seem to be after at the moment, a light-hearted chat or subject or column or something.
Yes, because what actually made you were the inspiration for this session, because your title, Talking to Yourself, which, you know, we've just been talking about with Neil and with Lisa, that idea, you did a very funny piece in the which we can send a link round for afterwards if people want to read it, but you did a very funny thing about talking to yourself, particularly at times like this, and then also your son did something. So I'm interested in the idea that your son did the photos. So
yeah,
it was a very collaborative thing, which you did completely on your own.
Yes. So basically I was speaking to a friend who said, oh, you know, she was doing me a favor by calling me once a week because she's really busy. And I said, oh, look, listen, I really appreciate this. And she said, listen, don't worry, I'm going so crazy, I'm talking to myself. And I thought, what, you mean you don't already talk to yourself? Because I work at home a couple of days a week writing, you know, I'm an experience. I'm my own best friend. I'll have a water cooler moment and I'll help myself decide what to wear. So I thought, well, I phoned BBC and they said, yeah, great, that's really a good one, because everyone's starting to do it, and also it's quite light-hearted. So then we thought, because when you're writing a column for online, obviously you need some good pictures. So then we were thinking, how can we illustrate this? And then I thought, well, my son's studying photography and he's got Photoshop, so let's do some pictures of me talking to me. So we had a hysterical afternoon, like, where we had to kind of blag our way into the supermarket and take a picture of me on one side and then me on the other side answering, and one at the sink for a water cooler moment, and one looking in the mirror like, does my bum look big in this? So, and actually the other people that I interviewed as well, Georgia, one of the people that I interviewed, is on lockdown with her boyfriend, who's a film editor. So the same, he did her photos. So so that was quite interesting, the way, and actually it was great. We were all really pleased with the photographs that we came out with, and thought, well, I'm not sure we would have done it like this if we could have had the BBC photographers, and I'm not sure we would have illustrated it like this. So yes, so that
it was necessity. Yeah, the necessity was that. And do you find when you're so again, Lisa was just talking about keeping things light, happy, are you finding that that's the response as well when you're talking to people? It must be very difficult sometimes if you're talking to people that you don't know, in terms of what their personal circumstances are, how they might have been affected, and therefore, you know, where you're going with the story, you're picking up, how do you make that work in this environment?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky balance at the moment. It's a tricky line, because, you know, you don't want to offend people, and ultimately, you know, lives are being lost and there's an awful lot of anxiety around. And as was just said, you know, people are suffering from mental health issues at the moment. So for instance, you know, there's that whole thing about talking to yourself, oh, it's the first sign of madness. Well, we couldn't put that, you know, or we could, but I would have to set myself up as the crazy person. So I think the way that I've always, whenever I'm asking people to do interviews with me, because they're members of the public and they're not being paid and it's BBC, is I'll always try and send myself up more than anyone else. So, and that they're kind of backing up my story. So, you know, I do things about exaggerating to the point of a little white lie, and actually, who wants to know that the cat sat on the mat? Everyone wants to know that the cat sat on the dog's mat, you know, because that's a better story. So I'll always send myself up to be the worst, and then have other people kind of backing that up. So yeah, it's tricky to find subjects that are funny without being offensive at the moment, or without upsetting people. And also obviously it's the BBC, and people feel quite rightly that the BBC slightly belongs to them, and my stuff goes out on the news page. So, you know, although they're stories, it's a fine line. I mean, I quite like to do something. I think I might even send it off to Standard Issue, which is the podcast, interestingly that I do, or the BBC, about how everyone thinks they look terrible on Zoom. And, you know, my friend said, oh, my friends are lamenting, you know, I look awful. I had no idea I look so awful. And I'm like, well, are you wearing makeup? Oh, no, well, I'm at home. And I'm like, well, you never go to work without makeup on. Have you sorted out your lighting? You know, have you, I will always make sure that I've got good lighting. So I've even been known to put a little candle in the front so I get a warm, cozy glow on my face.
Ah, okay, that's a good tip.
Little tip. So yes, it's finding things that will make people smile, and I think gentle humour is what people are after at the moment, as opposed to straight in with a satire.
Yeah. And then I feel I have to ask you about acting, because that is so, you know, the real, not the voice work that you do, but you know, the real life work. I mean, that must feel like a whole area has just been,
it's a massive hole for me and for all my friends. You know, it's a huge gap in all of our lives. And also, you know, it's how long is it going to take to pick up again? How is it going to be? How are they going to work out social distancing on a film set? I mean, I know there's been talk of how that's going to happen, but obviously it's going to cost so much more, because, you know, where you might have one bus to take everybody, now you're going to need 2 buses, and all the different crews are going to have to be separate from each other. I know this is being talked about at the moment. So I don't think that that's going to pick up super quickly. I think that there's loads and loads of ideas out there, and everyone's trying their best to think about how we can do it. Even theatre, you know, how they're going to seat people. It's a massive worry, you know, it's a massive worry. And I don't know. The only thing is that we're all in the same boat. It's not like you're at home thinking everybody else is doing, you know, why is everyone else working? Not me, you know, nobody is, apart from radio, audio, and, you know, we're doing things like we're reading stories. There's those kind of things that you can do directly to camera, but the big TV jobs, yeah. And how's it going to be? Like, that whole fun of being on set is the banter and the camaraderie between everybody. It's a great level of being on set, because, you know, the grip's just as important as the unit driver's, just as important as the producer. You know, everybody's very much part of a team, and that's gonna, yeah, I miss that. I really do. And it is a concern. It really is.
Yeah. And also, yes, as you say, it's that connecting really as much as anything, which I think is echoed across all businesses and industries. So it's just finding that different way to connect. Is there anything that you've seen that somebody's done, you know, from a creative perspective, from your point of view, that you think, wow, actually I hadn't thought of that? A little like Neil was saying, you know, everyone's looking for that magic, that holy grail of podcasting. Is that or maybe you haven't had a chance to see very much, because there is, if you've been busy, that's one of the drawbacks.
Yeah, I have. I mean, what I've heard about, and I wish I had the director's name to hand. I know Sheridan Smith is going to be doing it, and someone was telling me this weekend that there's a series of filming going on at the moment where the producer and the director is directing them, and they're having to get family members to film them. And the film, I mean, we can do all this sort of connecty things like Source Connect. I can do studio quality voiceovers through the internet with an engineer who knows what they're doing on the other end, and the producer is there too, speaking to me as if we're all in studio. So they've been doing something like that and making some TV, which sounds really interesting. Obviously it's just, you know, families where they've got a couple of actors in there. And I'd rather watch that than watch Zoom on. I know there's been a few Zoom things on TV, but frankly I'm sort of zoomed out by the end of the day. I don't know about anybody else. So that's quite interesting. And I mean, you know, that the industry will find its way, because it always does. And, you know, I think working creatively is a sort of need, personal need as much as a financial need for most people. They need to be working and making things. So as always, it will find its way. But
yes.
yeah, it's a concern, you know, being on set and being in the theatre and rehearsing and all those lovely things are a big gap and a big hole. And yeah, I really do miss that. And I miss that kind of being in studio and those little kind of sideways glances that you can give to somebody, and they know exactly what you mean. Or you might be at an ideas meeting, and it's those sort of subtle looks that you'll give each other to know that that's a good idea or a funny idea, or you know, oh God, what's she going on about now? Those kind of like little subtle looks, I miss that too. Yeah.
Oh, well, we're going to open up now, so you can have a few subtle looks from people if they're going to switch their cameras on.
I won't know where to look because we're all over the place.
Exactly. So I'm going to switch over to that view. If anybody has a question, please do type it into the chat. You don't have to switch your camera on if you don't want to at all. Hello, I can see some familiar faces. If anyone would like to ask a question, I mean, or just put your hand up if I can see you. I don't know if I can see everybody on my one screen, but I haven't got any questions. Oh, I've got a comment from Shelley saying that was a good bit of info. Thank you, Shelley. So that was, I think, when Neil, you were telling us about all we need is a phone. But anybody like to ask any questions, or we can carry on chatting. We can ask these guys what the best things are that they, well, I've got Sue's given us a tip of something that you couldn't, you know, there's a director somewhere doing something, but
I find
anybody
out.
yes, Google it. And have you got a picture, one of your pictures as well, one of the photos that you did of you talking to yourself, because they're quite fun. So if you find that, you can show us that on your screen. But anybody I can see, as I say, I can't see everybody, so I'm dependent on anybody wanting to put their hand up and ask a question or not, or type me a question. Oh, some things just popped up. Shelley, thank you, Shelley. Radio 4 is very good, according to everyone I know. Nice to hear from people who are responsible for some of the content. Fantastic, thank you. And my daughter is texting me to say people can raise their hands on the participants tab or type comments in the box. So you're very welcome to do that as well. And I hope that I will notice you. But so Neil, I wanted to ask you if you have ever thought of doing a podcast yourself. Have you ever been tempted to do one as the voice?
Funnily enough, I actually presented a local radio breakfast show in 2001 to 2003, and so I sort of got it out of my system. However, we are about to, weirdly, you asked, because we're about to start doing one ourselves, which I'm going to present, not because I want to get back to playing Robbie Williams songs on the radio again, but because it's a sort of fairly standard thing that people say is, why don't you do your own? Why don't you try and explain what it's all about to people? Actually, so yeah, what we're going to do is a series where we talk to a different client each week about why they got into podcasting and think about how it worked and why it worked and talk through the process. What I was cautious not to do, and apologies to anybody who falls into this category, there's a sort of podcast community that builds up, and which is all great, of people making their own podcasts. We do tend to talk to each other a lot, and there's a sort of temptation to make a podcast that sort of is enjoyed by other podcast producers, which I'm not really fussed about. What we will create is a podcast that hopefully marketing managers and strategists and content people can listen to and understand what it's about, because frankly, everybody who approaches us says, we've never done a podcast before. Can you explain to us how it works and how we do it? So everybody kind of needs their hand holding through that a little bit. So yeah, we're going to create a series starting in a couple of weeks. Hopefully it won't be too boring or incestuous. That's basically what I'm hoping for. If it has some nuggets of useful information and people listen to it for 20 minutes, then that'll have done its job.
Are you worried though about giving away trade secrets? And therefore, the knowledge that you have, I'm always interested in how much people are willing to share. Do you think we're more willing to share now?
Yeah, I'm kind of. It's a nice industry that we're in. It's still quite a young industry, and most of the people who we're in competition with we know or have worked with before. So I'm not too worried. I think we probably know most of our secrets. Actually, again, it's why I want to talk to marketing people, because I think if we're talking to potential clients, then we'll tell them something relatively new. It probably isn't that much of a secret to other people who do what we do. It's not giving away too much. It's just giving insight to those who might be interested in sussing it out. So yeah, I don't think we'll give too many trade secrets away.
There'll always be something that you'll be able to do that they can't necessarily replicate.
Yeah, I'm not about to talk people through our pricing model on a podcast. I don't think.
Okay. If I knew what your pricing model might be, I might ask you. Yeah. Exactly. And so Sue, show us your photos.
Oh, well, I haven't got the photos, but I will get them. What I have found out is it started Monday, and they're 4 15-minute dramas called Isolation Stories on ITV. And they've been so Eddie Marsden used his 2 sons to be in it. So basically actors have used their families, and they've been directed via Zoom. So I think that'd be quite interesting to watch. Photos, what shall I do? Put them on here and hold them up like you can tell?
Yeah. Can we see them?
Let's have a quick.
I'm hesitant to ask Richard to tell us how to share the screen, because I think we might all go chaotically, wildly wrong.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay, Lisa, I'm going to ask you what's your go-to listen at the moment in terms of, you need to put your microphone on. Number one, the radio professional.
Oops. Before I answer that, firstly, I watched Isolation Nation with Sheridan Smith last night, and it was very good, and I really enjoyed it, so I recommend that. And secondly, I've been asked to do a podcast myself on kind of, the premise of my show on the BBC, and I'm just that was just before lockdown happened, so I haven't progressed it too much yet, but due to be having a meeting about that, so yeah, that might be interesting to have a little go. So Neil, I might be asking you some tips, and what I'm listening to, well, happy music, obviously, because we all need that right now, but I do really enjoy Fern Cotton's Happy Place podcast. I just find I really like her interviewing technique. She has some great guests on there, and I like the way that she just kind of sits back and she just lets people talk. She's not constantly butting in all the time, and she asks the questions that we all really want to know and we all really want to ask, and she's not afraid to ask them. So I'm really enjoying that at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
There's a frankness, there's an openness, there's an honesty with podcasts that's quite difficult to replicate on radio, because I love radio, I'm from a radio background, but you've still got to hit the 1:30 news, or you've got to,
yes.
You can't go on for too long, or you've got someone tapping on the shoulder. And I think the ability, we try and limit people. We're lots of American podcasts that go on for an hour and a half and 2 hours, and we don't have that level of thankfully, that level of volume here. But the Fern does that brilliantly. Is just say, I'm just going to have an honest and open conversation. It might go on for ages. It might be nice and short, but it's down to the basic quality of audio, which is an intimacy. That people are listening on headphones. No, 90% of people listen to podcasts on their headphones, so you've got their undivided attention. You don't have to shout at them from the corner of the room. You don't have to try and say, get out of this feature because we've got to move on to the next one before anybody turns off. So it's a real luxury of a medium that I hope it preserves. And like you say, Fern does that brilliantly. Louis Theroux's just started a series for Radio 4, which I haven't listened to yet, but again, it's a benefit of isolation. Louis Theroux is just going to call his friends and do a podcast, and I expect and very much hope that to be genius.
Excellent. Sue, show us your genius.
Well, I've just sent it to
Richard.
But I'll sort of try and show you one. There we are.
Yes.
No, it's the light. You see, it's my lighting. It's my lighting that I had
That's
so that it was well lit. Is it backfired? Okay, can
it's
you
your
see?
candle. Yes, yes, I can see.
So
And they're both you.
one. That's both me. That's me and me at the water cooler.
Excellent.
Yeah. So it's basically about the fact that, you know, people, oh my goodness, I'm starting to talk to myself. Whereas, oh, there you
go. Look at
There's
that.
Yes, I know.
Fantastic.
Great. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. So we can find that on the BBC. There you go. Yeah. That's a nice one. Excellent.
That's my bum.
Love that one.
This. Yeah. Yeah. Deciding what to wear. And this is the one that George's boyfriend did, who just happened to be a film editor, who just happens to be in isolation with her. So
don't tell us that though, Sue. We want to know that he's not a film editor and just did it himself. That's all we want to know. So we're going to need to wrap up shortly, I think, because we have our allocated time. I'm just wondering, anybody else got a question? I'm going to check the chat and see. I'm not seeing anybody else there. So thank you. Oh, there you go. It's saying Sue's entire life. Thank you, Richard.
It's the whole family. Yeah.
Thank you, the whole family. So if anybody else would like to chip in, thank you all for switching your cameras on. It's lovely to see you all. I don't think I can see anybody because I know there's some names there that I recognise and can't see. But I just want to, Emma's just said, I can finally see. Oh no, it's gone again. Sorry, Emma.
Oh
no. If you want to ask a question, Emma, just pop your microphone on. We'll listen. No.
Is it on?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I've unmuted you, Emma.
Is it on now?
Hello. Yeah. Did you want to ask a question, Emma?
Oh, cool. I just wanted to know what are the most popular podcasts in your opinion?
Neil, I think that's one for you.
So the most, I was just going to have a quick look on the charts. So we said the most popular are the American ones. So have a quick look at the chart right now. The most popular podcast of all time is Serial. Serial came out in 2014 and is a true crime series, which is by far the most popular genre in podcasting. It's basically an investigation into a historic murder and to see whether the guy who was convicted of it actually did it. They launched it without any advertising, and I think in the 8th week they said, if you want series 2, please go online and donate on our page to see if we can fund a series 2. And by the Thursday of that week, they had $25 million, and it's a ridiculous success story, and it's really what made podcasting mainstream, both here and in the States. The most popular podcast, so if you like any football at all, then Peter Crouch's podcast which was a show for 5 Live, again, it's just an ex-footballer talking in a way that he would never get away with in any other medium, talking about things that have happened in his career. Actually, right now, looking at it, the #1 podcast right now is Grounded with Louis Theroux, which I just mentioned, which is the Radio 4 show. Catherine Ryan does a brilliant show that she's just started off. The most popular podcast in the world right now is Joe Rogan. He's an American guy who just gets people into his garage, or right now down the line, but he got Barack Obama into his garage to come and talk to him, and they do kind of 2-hour chats. Absolutely enormous. Adam Buxton, if you were ever a fan of Adam Buxton and Adam and brilliantly kind of windy, kind of nonsense podcast that again is popular. So yeah, there's a huge range of stuff out there, and right now news. So podcast listening has gone up 20% during lockdown. We thought it was going to go down because people normally listen on their commute. Actually, people are just looking for information. So there's just huge number of news, current affairs, Apple have a whole coronavirus section of their podcast offering because people are just after sort of long form, well-informed conversation. So yeah, so that was a very long answer to a question of what's the most popular podcast. There's a lot out there.
That was brilliant. Well, Emma says love Louis. So
there you go. Perfect.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to stop I'm going to finish by asking each of you. I'm going to ask you what 3 words. You know the what 3 words, which says where you are physically. But I'm going to do what 3 words and ask you what 3 words are sort of describe your day at the moment. So we may have some overlap or we may not. So just 3 words. I'm going to give you 2 seconds to think about that and just say thank you so much to everybody for joining. It's been great. It's great to see people's faces. It's great to have a chance to talk, and thank you so much to my 3 guests as well. And next week I think we're going to do something on how a film festival have approached going online. I want to do something about the Magdalen Choir. I don't know if people saw that. May Day, the Magdalen Choir did the most stunning rendition of singing. They would normally climb up to the top of the tower here in Oxford and sing their hearts out. They couldn't do that this year, so I want to get the producer in to find out how they did that, because it was just stunningly done. So if anybody has any thoughts or ideas, wants to come and talk about something in particular, just get in touch, either with myself or with B4, and we'll just keep going with the chats if this works, if this format works. So thank you. So who am I should have a random, the panel should swing round and we should pick on somebody. I'm gonna pick on you, Sue, first of all. What 3 words describe your day?
My day to day, or the general corona?
Just a general day in the life.
Extreme technical education.
That's good. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Lisa, I'm going to pick on you next.
Okay. Eclectic, creative, and busy.
Excellent. Good. Thank you. Neil.
I have a hero called Ed Catmull, who's one of the guys who created Pixar and still runs Pixar, and he has a phrase which is "just try something so we can change it," which I've always kind of had as my creative thing. So just try something.
Excellent. I like that very much. Lovely. Well, thank you so much. We shall happily think of you all living out those what 3 words every day. But thank you so much for joining us. And I think, Richard, this is going to be available on Catch Up if you want to tell anyone about it or get anybody else. And Anne, I've just been told you made a comment. Hello. Isn't it amazing? Anne Spackman. So 14 years ago, we did a World Cup podcast series with Skinner and Badil. At the Times made it up as we went along. Do you remember that, Neil? Just before we go.
I do remember it in the days where we were all just trying something. It was, great. And both Frank and David have done podcasts since, and they're geniuses.
It was amazingly successful in that we got it sponsored.
They went around France, didn't they? Is that what they actually? I can't remember where the World Cup was. Where are we talking about? Germany.
Yeah. And the thing I remember about it is that because they were going to the matches, which happened mainly in the evening, in order to edit it, you had to get up in your gym jams at about 2 o'clock in the morning to go through, check it for any sort of legal issues or anything like that, and make sure it was going to go live in the morning, and hope there were some people there, because we had never done anything like it before. And we did it with Absolute Radio, and they were up for it. And it was one of those real sort of experiments at the time. But the relationship between the two of them, their wit, was what really carried it through. Not the football, where England did pretty abysmally, I seem to remember.
Yes. No, it was brilliant. The Times, as well as the BBC, the Times and the broadsheets have absolutely pioneered podcasting and persisted with it whilst everybody else put it to bed for a while. So,
I used to do the Guardian Family podcast, which sadly didn't carry on, because that was a great show. Yeah, small Guardian Family podcast. But that was years ago as well. That was, I think, about 10, 12 years ago. Yeah.
And now we're about to have Times Radio, which will be a whole take on Radio 4.
We discussed that at the time, and people slightly said, "Don't be so ridiculous."
It'll be fascinating.
And at the time, they were probably right.
Maybe. But now, it'll be really looking forward to seeing what they do.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you, Anne. I'm going to have 3 words for this evening. I've just done my 3 words for this evening, which are create, connect, and smile, because I've seen so many smiles tonight, which is lovely. So thank you so much, everybody.